Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Operations Planning Committee for Thursday, April 8th, 2021 to order. We have meeting minutes of March 11th, which should have been sent to you by Linda. So if you could just take a moment and review if you haven't already, and when you're ready, I'll either take corrections, additions, or a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Duke.
I'll second that.
Thank you, John. Is there any further discussion?
Nope, looks
All
good to
those
me.
in favor, great, thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, great. Motion carries. Okay, on to our business of the day. Why don't we start with John Zagrodski budget as the hot topic.
I thought everyone had had quite enough of that by now. So we finished up with our budget process on Tuesday and have voted a budget and mill rate to recommend to the RTM, which now starts their process, where we ended up is as follows. We've got a mill rate increase of 3.15%. So that mill rate increase was considerably more obviously than last year when we were essentially flat. But if you think about the mill rate increase versus what was in the all of the original budgets that were proposed to us, it was north of 7%. So I think we've gotten to a good spot on that. How we got there actually was not so much through cutting expenditures, but more around rethinking how we do a few things. So for example, one of the changes that we've made is that historically, we have had an annual accrual where we would set aside money in a fund for the purpose of purchasing fire apparatus, so big fire trucks, that sort of thing. And historically, that's been in the $400,000 or $500,000 a year range. And if you think about these long-lived assets and this idea of what the most efficient way to pay for them is, we came to the conclusion with obviously Jamie and the Board of Selectmen being involved and on board with this as well, that's just not the most efficient way to finance these vehicles. Jack Davis and others with the RTM F&B came to the same conclusion. And basically what that conclusion is look, you don't have to accrue for all this. A better way to do that is to treat this like all other long-lived assets and bond for them. And so we've decided to make that switch, take the money out of that reserve, use part of it to buy the fire truck that's anticipated for this year. It's a ladder truck. But that going forward, what we're going to do is use a bonding process for large equipment like that. Similarly, we took out $164,000 reserve contribution that was planned for public works vehicles. And in the process of cleaning all that up, we also cleared out a lot of reserve accounts that had been sitting on the town's balance sheet. And we've spent time on this in the past, but this time we had a fairly aggressive effort, again, working with the Board of Selectmen and others to clear out those accounts and get them consolidated. So where we've ended up, I'll give you a few other statistics and then be done besides the mill rate. One of the things that I've talked a lot about in the past has been the importance of the town's financial reserves. So here that referred to as the general fund balance. So we started that process with about $25 million in that account or in that reserve at the first of this current fiscal year, so last July. And if you think about the appropriation we had over the course of the year to support the Board of Education with their COVID expenditures, but you add in things like projected surpluses for this year, as well as the sort of a couple other expenditures that we had over the course of the year, we're still able to use about $2.7 million in fund balance to support next year's budget and still end up with $24 million in that reserve. And that is about 16% of our projected town revenues for next year, well in excess of our 12% target. And as I said on Tuesday, having a fund balance at that level not only is prudent with regard to credit agency assessments of the town's finances, but also gives us enough in reserve should the Board of Education come and say, look, we have some unanticipated COVID expenditures and we need your help. that we've got the reserves in place to cover that, which is a longstanding commitment that the Board of Finance has had. Second is with regard to these reserve accounts I was talking about earlier. The big one that the Board of Finance manages is our capital reserve. There's a separate contingency reserve I won't go into, but this is where those fire apparatus funds are going to go. But even after doing that, we're going to pull $1 million out of the Board of Finance contingency, and that's going to be used to support capital projects this year. So the puts and takes of these changes, as well as a few others in the overall budget process, that in a nutshell is how we got from north of 7% mill rate increase to something closer to 3%. So I think in the end, these were a lot of one-time actions that we took, but I believe it went a long way to cleaning up the town's balance sheet, cleaning up how we think about paying for large, expensive assets like fire trucks, and also just clearing out a lot of reserve accounts so that they could be concentrated and focused so that we could make sure we don't lose track of those and manage them a little bit better. So I'm quite happy with the way the process worked out. I'd stress that it was a gigantic team effort, starting with the very efficient and I think lean budgets presented by both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, but also real hard work by all members of the Board of Finance, as well as Jack Davis and F&B. I think the collaboration worked well this year, and we've gotten to an end product that meets the needs of the town and the schools, preserves and protects services we've all come to expect, and yet gives us something that's responsible to taxpayers. And so once again, we've ended up in a balanced spot that's the perfect Goldilocks budget. It's not too much, but not too little. So again, thank you to everyone who's been involved with that. As a next step, as I said, the RTM takes over the process. At this point, they are the final decision makers on the budget because they are the ones with ultimate appropriating authority. And I believe their meeting to have a final vote on the budget is set for May 10th. So that's an update on our process. Board of Finance kind of goes quiet for the summer months coming up. We've got a few things that we're working on, but that's certainly been the major bulk of our work recently. So that's all I've got, unless anybody has any questions.
John, thank you. And if my colleagues here would indulge me for just a few moments, I have some comments and a question for you. John, I think you know that over the years that we've worked together, I have always encouraged the Board of Finance to be mindful of the aggregation of money in our general fund balance. As I look at it in some ways, could it be that we've overtaxed people? We've had less expenses. Departments have done a great job in reducing their expenditures, so we've been able to build up that fund over time. And we want to make sure that we're always reinvesting those tax dollars and not just, keeping in reserves for reserve's sake. However, I'm very mindful of the very real issue that each and every year our budget grows. And that means each and every year our budget reserves, according to your policies, have to increase. What I would love for you to try and take a few minutes to explain, and Kate can certainly join in here as, a finance expert. Connecticut is unique in that we have as our sole source of municipal revenue property tax. And we can have a whole conversation on the over-reliance on property tax and the burden that that's placing on communities right now. But because of that fact, rating agencies allow us to, I'll use this word, enjoy a lower general fund reserve because we have this inherent ability to go back and tax our residents at a higher level to, rebuild our coffers. In other states across the country, they do not enjoy that. The reserves that are required by rating agencies in other states are much higher than what they are here in Connecticut. So when, conversations are that, we've got $24 million in our general fund reserve and that's too much money. But if you think about it in the context of good financial policy and what rating agencies look at, I think the Board of Finance does a very good job of managing that to the appropriate level as an important cushion for a rainy day. We've just had the biggest rainy day that we've ever had, right? And it continues. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit so that we can help educate the public on the importance of finding that sweet spot in the general fund balance.
I definitely would like Kate to weigh in. She's smarter on all things than I am, but I would say that
I wouldn't go.
No pressure, Kate. No pressure.
yes, setting her up for success in her comments, as it were. So we had a meeting with bond counsel, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, kind of talking through all this in the context of how ratings agencies look at something like fund balance. And interestingly, there's a quantitative aspect to the way they determine all of this. And there's actually a set of rating factors that they look at. And there's a weighting to each one of those. So the first one would be sort of the economy of the town and your tax base. And it has a weighting of about 30%. And so they look at the tax base, the median family income, value of the property per capita, that sort of thing. And all those factors are assessed and quantified, and they take up sort of 30%. Another 30% of the weighting is town finances, and a component of that is fund balance. And so if you think about what the components of that are, it's both fund balance, it's the change in fund balance over time, it's the change in your cash balance as a percentage of reserves. So a number of sort of financial metrics that comprise the finances part of that. And that's another 30%. And there's others. There's management of the town and its institutional framework and operating history. That's 20%. Debt and pensions is 20%. So there's a quantitative side to all that they took us through. The quantitative side or qualitative side, I think, is a little harder to assess, because we could come in and say we have a fund balance of X percentage, and maybe that's below their threshold, right? But our town is so much stronger on other things like the economy and tax base and property values that it's almost inconceivable that we would be downgraded. And in fact, I posed this question to him. I said, okay, with a town like this, can you give us an example of a town that had a fund balance percentage that was lower than what the analysts prescribe or what the criteria are, that actually got downgraded? And you really can't point to one. And so my response to your question is that I think the fund balance percentage, in terms of prudence and what the ratings agencies look for, it's both art and science. I described the science in terms of the quantitative metrics that they use, but there's also an art that says, okay, well, how much do we really need, and what are those requirements potentially going to be? I came out, as I said before, our policy is 12%. The ratings agencies seem to like 15%, at least that's what we were told. So our floor is lower than that, but we set it that way because all these other factors are so much stronger. Our fund balance projected for the end of this year will be at about 16%. I got comfortable with that higher number because, one, we've eliminated a lot of these reserve accounts that could have been used for other expenditures, and I'm not really sure how that's going to play out over the next 12 months. We might actually need to have money in fund balance to pay for those things, so I'm okay with the number being a little higher. And as I committed to before, if either the Board of Education or the Board of Selectmen has unforeseen COVID expenditures this fall, I think the vaccine progression rate is terrific, but we are not out of the woods. As you said before, it's rainy day funds, and it was raining pretty hard, and it's still raining, right? So there's a possibility that we could have significant expenditures if a new strain comes into the fore, or we get another infection wave. So having those reserves and fund balance in anticipation of that possibility, I think, is pretty important. And so that's how I kind of got comfortable with the 16% fund balance where we ended up. I am mindful of your point about taxing citizens excessively to keep money in reserve in this low interest rate environment. It's not making anything. But I think on balance, we've gotten to a good spot at the moment. Kate, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so just a couple things. One, a little history. A few years back, when the federal government was having some issues and the rating agencies downgraded the federal government, they put a number of AAA communities on a watch list. We were one of them. Part of that is based on the theory that no subordinate entity should have a higher rating than the parent entity. But a number of AAA communities in Connecticut were put on the watch list because they looked at the standard, and the standard across the country for fund balance is about 20%. And as you stated, Jamie, we're in Connecticut. They accept a lower percentage because we have the property tax backing us up. For example, just across the border in Westchester County, they're more reliant on income tax and sales tax than we are as municipalities here. So they need to have a higher fund balance percentage, to even out the cyclical nature of their revenue base. So normally Moody's and S&P recognize the fact that we have a very steady, strong base. That was one instance where they didn't. We were never downgraded, but they had put us on that watch list. The other thing I wanted to add is, it's not always just how much you have, but it's how you're using it. So we could have a big, fat, healthy fund balance, and if they see us all of a sudden using it in ways that they think is irresponsible, they might put us on a watch list or consider us for downgrade. And Nistan mentioned it is just one of the factors. It's so much of why we have a AAA is the management. We have the strong finances, we have the strong economy, but it's also the management. We make our pension contributions, we make our OPEB contributions, we budget responsibly. We don't use the fund balance irresponsibly. So it's all those put together.
Kate, can you give us examples? I know that one of the sort of financial cardinal sins is to bond for operating expenses.
Oh, yeah.
Can you give us examples of what would be a red flag for a rating agency in terms of fund balance use?
Well, if we've used it in the past as an offset to the mill rate increase, and I'm not going to say it's irresponsible, but it's not one of their favorite things. I think anything other than one-time uses where you have to refill that hole would be problematic.
So it leads you down the path of using fund balance for capital expenditures.
It's the best use.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate that. I just thank you for indulging that conversation. I want to make sure that we're always educating the public on our financial policies and procedures as we move forward. So, John, do you have anything else in your Board of Finance report?
No, other than just simply to thank everybody who's been involved in this process. It's always a ton of work. It's always a ton of collaboration and meetings, but we got to a good spot thanks to that collective effort. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yes, Seth, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to congratulate John. This was a tough year. When you're looking at a 7 to 9% pressure, that's a big hike to start with. And making some changes in funding strategy, really, this was the ideal. If you were going to do it, this was a good year to do it. Managing the funding of the fire apparatus to the useful life of the apparatus I always felt made a lot of sense. Because you bond, let's say, for 20 years and the useful life of the equipment is 20 years, it seems to make sense to me. And taking the leftover money out of the reserves and using that effectively to keep the mill rate down this year, I thought was a great move. And I'm also very pleased at the relationship between F&B and the Board of Finance in this process. It wasn't always that way. Having spent 17 years doing it, I know, and I think it it says a lot to the management style that you have, John, in making that happen and in seeing the result. The result is here, 3.15. Hey, it could have been a lot worse.
Well, like I say to many people, I don't care what kind of job you have, it's a people job. And certainly this one's no different. So, but a team effort. I appreciate your comments, though. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will move on then to Duke, Board of Education.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone on another nice spring morning. I will just echo Chairman Zagrodzky's comment and also thank John and his team and the RTM F&B and RTM education that we continue to work with as they go through their process. But you know, the vote this week continued to enforce the community's investment in education, and I think working together over the course of the last several months was a good partnership with the Board of Finance and some of those other committees that we continue to work with. So we're excited as the budget process continues to move forward. I think we've built up all the right partnerships, the right communication, and I think the key is, you know, working with Board of Finance and these other groups on the type of reporting that's needed, especially around the COVID tracking that we went through. So I think we're at a good place, and you know, we continue to invest in the education of our kids in a high performing district. So thank you, John, and we continue to look forward to working with you, Seth, and the subcommittees as we finish up this process this year. But thank you. It was a good process, good questions, tough questions, a lot of good dialogue. So thank you all. Just a quick update on COVID as we head into our spring break next week. We reported last night 28 cases in the schools, 289 quarantined. That has definitely ticked up a little bit, hence because of the nice weather, and you know, we're kind of into all our sports, and so we stressed several times at last night's meeting to please continue to follow and adhere to guidelines, especially around young people and anyone not feeling well or pending a test coming into schools. You know, do the right thing. We continue to get kudos at my level and other board chairs I talk to and superintendents that Alan talks to. Like we're kind of a shining light as to how we've managed this and kept our students in school, and that's what we want to do through the end of the year. So especially as we come up on this week with travel, we went over in detail kind of the guidelines last night, and Alan has you know, surveyed not only staff but families about travel and reinforced kind of the travel guidelines so we can continue to march towards the rest of the school year. And also there should be some more guidelines coming out, I think shortly, potentially late yesterday or today, on prom and graduation and celebrations and stepping up celebrations at the elementary school in Middlesex. So all of that stuff is in the works. We learned a lot from last year. We'll incorporate some of that celebratory stuff, but we are moving forward with a prom, with graduation, and we'll work with the guidelines that come out with the state. But we need to continue to celebrate the success of our students over what has just been an incredibly challenging, you know, almost 2 years, right? Year and a half. Total cases 315 and over 2,600 quarantined. So a lot. So we continue to monitor that on a regular basis. As you know, we move forward thanks to Jamie and the health department, Elisa Kosuchi, David Knopf. We had our second round of vaccinations last Saturday for our teachers. Our teachers, those that chose to participate, are vaccinated. As you know, there are some side effects as always. We unfortunately had to close the high school, Middlesex, and one elementary school on Monday because of absenteeism. We were back fully opened on Tuesday. Continue to monitor that as people get vaccinated. But a great, again, team partnership effort from a community standpoint to get our teachers vaccinated. I know with the help of Jamie and the health department and Alicia and Dr. Adley, with full support from the board, they are working on student vaccines and a lot of planning going on around that. There's about a 900 count in terms of students that would be eligible for the Pfizer vaccine. So we're working through that potential clinic. As you know, the states have designated alliance districts to go first, but Alicia, I think, had a meeting as of late last night, late yesterday, with the potential of that opening up and us potentially doing a clinic sometime in May. So we're excited about having the opportunity to offer that. Another couple of quick updates on the fun, exciting side. If you think of the challenges we've had over the last year, the Darien Public Schools received the distinction of Best Communities for Music Education in 2021 by the NAM Foundation. It's a national philanthropic group representing music merchants in the industry. So we are one of 23 districts to earn that distinction this year. And as you all know, anyone that's attended the concerts over the years, it's a highlight of the year, the concerts, the theater, all that great stuff that goes on in the schools. And we will be looking and scheduling some outdoor concerts to keep with that theme. And it's an important part of the curriculum in the schools, the music program. We're moving forward, and toward the end of the month, we'll be out with a schedule on the public hearing as we move forward the next facilities project around the removable of portables, the library redesign, and some renovations to Henley, Holmes, and Royal. So next step will be a public hearing. We're looking at potentially Thursday, April 29th for a public hearing. Shortly thereafter, the board will accept and review and approve educational specifications for those renovations, and then we'll move it forward in terms of the town process and moving toward a building committee. So we're excited. That kind of continues the path we went down with, rebuilding Ox Ridge, getting the portables out of town, working on the libraries, and then doing some other work around the educational spaces in these schools. So it's an exciting project. I think Alan has updated the first selectman office on just continuing to move forward the use of the basement for storage at the central office here. We are also have had good recruitment efforts. We appointed last night Julie Droller, who is the principal at Henley. We appointed her last night to the Director of Educational Curriculum. It is a great move for Julie, who's done a great job as principal of Henley over the last 3 years. That leaves us with the opportunity for a new principal at Tokenique with Mary Michelson's announced retirement, which we wish her well. She's been an incredible principal over at the Tokenique district there. And so we've had great recruitment efforts all the way around. So a lot of our recruitment efforts are moving forward in the interview process and the round of interviews. So we feel good about the positions that we have open. As I talked a little bit about graduations and proms, principals continue to focus on year-end activities. The principals we are replacing are Middlesex, Tokenique, and now Henley. So those are the interviews that are moving forward. A lot of our parents took the opportunity at public comment last night to speak about diversity, racism, and inclusion. They spoke eloquently. I know the PTOs are organizing to have folks within those organizations focus on and work with the board and the administration in line with our strategic plan around those topics. It's important that we continue that dialogue, and the board and the administration, and I know the parents are committed to that. So a lot of work will be going on around that. As you know, we had another incident over at an elementary school with a swastika symbol like etched in. So there's work being done at that elementary school from an education and a communication standpoint, and that will roll out throughout the district. We've done that, and it's an important thing to continue to build into our overall conversation from a community standpoint, not just the schools. So stay tuned for more information on that. We did get our revised allocation on the American Rescue Plan. $964,000 was the amount. That can be used over 3 years. So the administration will be working in hand with the board on what that looks like as we go into the new school year. It does look like there will be some continued mask mandates, social distancing that will roll into the new school year. Let me just see. I will pause there. I think that's a good quick update and open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Duke. That was a very comprehensive report. Does anyone have questions for Duke?
Thank you, Jamie. I'll just add, it's one thing that we do track. We went over last night, kindergarten enrollment, and so we're at 285 registrations as of the end of March. We're projecting 351. So I think as the warm weather heats up and we know the real estate market is heated up, we should see those projections increase over the next couple of months. But that is something that we closely monitor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Duke? Okay, thank you. Then we'll move to Jeremy Ginsberg giving the report this morning for planning and zoning.
Yes, Mr. Albani sends his regrets. The thing that was first and foremost on his mind was the expected and anticipated improvements to room 206, which would allow.
Jeremy, if you could increase the volume on that mic, that would help.
Mr. Albani was excited about the improvements to room 206, which would allow planning and zoning to get back into that room and better presentations using monitors in that room. This past Tuesday, the Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on pending legislation up in Hartford. Very well attended, a lot of great speakers. Folks are still sending in their public comments. Our office still serves as a resource to other communities who are analyzing, reviewing the pending legislation and trying to make changes and amendments to their own zoning regulations. They're looking to Darien as leaders, looking to see what we've done in our successes here. I have a call with Greenwich and New Canaan later today. But the legislation is still uncertain at this point. I don't think Jamie and I have any idea where that's going. Duke, I did get the email from Dr. Adley on the basement storage, and the Board of Selectmen is going to look at that. Planning and Zoning will look at that once that's all done. We'll probably get to that in late April, early May. And the last thing I want to talk about is, which is something the Board of Selectmen will need to act upon, and possibly the RTM, but we're not sure yet, is a number of changes required as part of the Corbin project. Mr. Genovese has anticipated amending and changing some easements and right-of-ways. I just was in an hour-long meeting yesterday with Mr. Genovese and his attorney. We're going to discuss it with Wayne Fox to see exactly what the process is on those. Abandoning certain rights the town has, taking easements and access in different locations. This will really set the stage for access from Corbin Drive to get into the municipal parking lot behind the Goose and CVS. You'll be able to basically go from the post office to CVS. And the exact driveways were approved by Planning and Zoning, but there's some right-of-way paperwork and deeds that need to be changed. So we'll all see and be working more on that throughout April and May. And Seth, I hope to get an answer to you very soon, probably in the next week or two, on whether that needs RTM review and action. I think that's all I have to report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Does anyone have questions for Jeremy?
Not a question, but What Jeremy was talking about with room 206 is that TV 79 has applied for a grant from the Area 9 Cable Council to procure and install monitors in room 206 that would facilitate greater public access to our meetings.
Thank you, Kate. There's always lots going on in the world of planning and zoning. I'm sure that we'll have updates in the future on some other projects. The only thing that I would like you to speak to, Jeremy, is if you know the status. I think the East Lane housing for the developmentally disabled is moving ahead pretty swiftly and well under construction. So if you have an update on that, it would be great.
Yes, the East Lane project, which is David Genovese constructing 12 units of housing for developmentally disabled young adults. We're working with his attorney on the applicable deed restrictions that get filed in the land records, which would deed restrict them based upon income and disability. Those are wrapping up. We expect David to get his project completed over the next few months. The other thing I should announce is the first phase of the federal Realty project will be complete, which is the new Walgreens will be opening sometime in the next, let's call it before the end of April, probably in the next week. They're going to open, stock, train, and then the week after probably open to the general public. So that is really the first phase of their project is complete and on schedule. So we're excited about that and look forward to a brand new Walgreens.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but the public is eager to know what the status of the Palmer's redevelopment project is.
Sure. I spoke to Mr. Palmer last week because originally he had said that they were hoping for a late spring 2021 start, which I took to mean June. And when I spoke to Mr. Palmer last week, he said it's not going to be June, and he was not able to give me a date certain. So unfortunately, I wish I had a more optimistic update than that. But at this point, Mr. Palmer is working with his group on trying to get started, but he does not have a start date at this point.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions for Jeremy? No? Then Seth, RTM.
RTM doesn't have a big agenda right away. We were going to have the AFSCME contract on our agenda, but the union hasn't approved the contract yet. So that's going to happen sometime in April. We probably won't vote on that until June. So we're going to do pickleball courts. We'll do the funding for the pickleball courts at our next meeting and ask David Knopf to come by and brief us again on the status of COVID-19 and what's going on with the town. His presentations are greatly appreciated by the RTM, and he's nice enough to take some time out to brief us, and it's a nice thing that he's doing. We probably will have something on an easement related to Ox Ridge, the building committee. That will come before us at some point here, and that for the time being, that's about what it is. We have, of course, the budget that will come up here in May, and we've got a peek at what that's going to be today. So we'll look forward to that. But that's what's going on with the RTM.
Thanks, Seth. I think I saw Kate needed to make a comment.
Yeah, the union is expected to vote on their contract on the 23rd. If the RTM does not want to vote on it in May at your regular meeting, you will lose the opportunity. June will be too late. Under the state rules, we have a limited time from when the first approval is granted or takes place. So once the union votes, we'll have 30 days. So that's why I did ask, when I told you it was not going to be on the 19th, I asked for it to be on the May agenda. I realize you don't like doing things, but except for the budget at that meeting. But if you don't vote on the contract at that meeting, the RTM will lose the opportunity. And that's fine. If you're okay with that, that's fine. Just wanna make
Again,
sure you
that just
understand that.
depends on, when the union votes.
Seth, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you've been in touch directly with Wayne Fox. He would have a better answer than me, and maybe Kip Coons as well, on how urgent that easement is. I do not know. I'm glad you mentioned it, because that's the one thing I thought of, is that CLNP/Eversource easement, which would allow them to start putting some of the underground work in. Certainly keep that in mind. Talk to Wayne, talk to Kip Coons about the timing on that. I'm not sure, but I'm glad they mentioned it to you.
Now, I'm in dialogue with him about it. And I mean, I found out about it Monday morning. So, I mean, we'll act
Okay.
as quickly as we can.
Any other questions for Seth? Okay, thank you very much, Seth.
You're on.
Sorry about that. Okay, a couple of things from my office. There's certainly a focus on the American Rescue Plan and what that means in terms of funding to the state and cities and towns. As Duke mentioned, direct aid to the Darien Public Schools is expected at $964,000. We've gotten notice that the town of Darien should be expecting $2.1 million. There's also additional funding that nationwide is allocated to counties. And of course, Connecticut doesn't have county government, but we have these funny things called COGS. So our federal delegation was able to get a distribution from the American Rescue Plan for the funding that would otherwise go to county governments, which will be additional money that will be allocated to cities and towns. We don't know how much that money will be or exactly how it will be distributed. For cities that are over 50,000 people, they're going to get a direct funding from the Treasury Department. Those are called entitlement cities. We're not one of those, so the money that the town of Darien is going to receive, not the education money, but the $2.1 million, will be passed through from the state government. And we will be getting instructions, specific instructions from the Treasury Department on, number one, what we can use this money for and how we can draw it down over a series of years. It's not all going to be available to us in one lump sum. We anticipate that the Treasury will not issue their guidance until the end, virtually the end of the 60-day period that they have to distribute the funding. Congress approved the ARP bill on March 11th. They have 60 days from the 11th to make those distributions. So sometime thereabouts, all the guidance will be coming from Treasury. CCM is going to hold a webinar for municipal officials and finance directors, et cetera, so that we know exactly how we're allowed to earmark those funds. There will be possibilities that those funds could be utilized to support our small businesses, to support our nonprofits, but I'm going to recommend to work in concert with the Board of Finance to convene a committee of people to talk about exactly how the town of Darien wants to utilize this funding. In relation to the funding that Hartford and New Haven and Waterbury and New Britain are getting, some of those cities are getting almost $100 million. This is a small amount, but we certainly want to make sure that those dollars are directed in the right way, that they're the most productive for our municipality, and importantly, don't create a future funding obligation. Kate and I have been talking about a number of ideas that we look forward to expanding the group of people that will make those collective decisions. I want to thank the Board of Finance for the important sort of policy work that you've done this year on the budget with reserve funds and changing the methodology for purchasing large pieces of capital equipment. I think that's a really positive step forward. Obviously, it requires us being very diligent about holding to our bonding policy so that we don't let that get out of hand over time. And you've done a great job of that over the years. Just briefly following up on what Jeremy said about the zoning and housing bills, that's the game of whack-a-mole this year up in Hartford. Housing and zoning bills have appeared in nearly every committee in the legislature: housing, planning and development, transportation, finance, and revenue and bonding. Don't really know where they're going to go. Some of the bills are could facilitate dramatic change in communities like ours. And I would be remiss in not stating the obvious that it is actually towns like ours that are the target for these pieces of legislation. I've tried to stay along with Steve Mulvaney, his planning and zoning colleagues, very up to date on these proposals. So we'll keep the public up to date as we can. And I want to thank the Planning and Zoning Commission for holding that public hearing. You know, people are so busy right now with keeping their kids in school, staying healthy, you know, figuring out how to do their jobs from home, taking care of their parents, and maybe they're sick, or maybe they've lost loved ones to COVID. No one is paying attention to these sweeping housing and zoning bills that are coming that could make a dramatic impact to the town of Darien. So we'll see where they go. Just because they don't make it out of committee necessarily does not mean that they won't move forward. There's a feeling among some that fewer pieces of legislation will actually be voted upon by the legislature, but there will be larger, more omnibus bills that will be moved forward through the legislative process. And anything that has a financial implication, either spending or revenue, can find its way into the budget implementer bill, which usually comes out about midnight the night before it's going to be voted on. I'm being a bit facetious, but not really. So we have to be diligent in watching for these things. And I will continue to be a strong advocate for, yes, good policies from our planning and zoning department to continue to incentivize housing choice, but to also make sure that we're kind of doing it our way. And I would say our way has been pretty good since we've built over 900 units of multifamily housing in the last 20 years, with certainly more on the horizon. COVID, I think everybody generally knows where we are with COVID. Do hit some highlights there. We are seeing an uptick in cases. They are most likely attributed to variants. That is the assumption from the Department of Public Health. The variants are more highly transmissible. The good news is that more people are getting and are eligible for vaccines. So if you get COVID, there hopefully is less of a possibility that you'll have significantly negative symptoms or reactions to COVID. I will tell you that we are hearing of people that are fully vaccinated that are getting COVID. So really important to continue mask wearing, distancing, and washing your hands often. A bit concerned about upcoming vacations. Everybody's chomping at the bit to get away and have some fun. But I think my big ask today is, if you do go away, that's fine. You know, the governor's relaxed the travel guidelines. You don't have to quarantine or test. The school has their own policy. Employers have their own policies about that. But don't assume if you have allergy symptoms or you think you have a mild cold that it's not COVID. You must assume that it is COVID, and you should stay home and get tested until you have a negative result. The impact on the large cohort quarantines in our schools is really sad for our kids. So let's all do our part to help keep our kids in school. We're working on what summer activities will or will not look like for the town of Darien. The Parks and Rec Department has made the decision to not host the town fireworks this year. Too many unknowns. We can't gather in that large of a quantity of people at this point in time, or at least be able to make the financial commitments we would need to with all those unknowns. We're waiting for more guidance about the Memorial Day parade. I'm not sure that will be going off in a traditional sense, but certainly we can have a parade as we did last year. So waiting every day on more information. Looking forward to taking up and supporting the Board of Education's desire to use the basement of 35 Leroy for a copy center and storage. Board of Selectmen will move that forward, I'm sure, and then it will come to the RTM for their approval, since it is town use of town property. We're helping our small businesses continue, and as the weather gets nice, the state is allowing us to continue outdoor dining for our restaurants. We're working with some local business partners to make that happen in a very aesthetically pleasing way. So, you know, that's one thing that the town can do that's been great. And it really creates a sense of vibrancy in our downtown to see people outdoors eating and enjoying our town center. So I'm really excited about that. As I said, there might be money in the ARP plan to also help our small businesses. So we'll wait and see what we can do with that. And WestCog continues to talk about ways that we can work together as our member municipalities on regional service sharing and on trying to develop a regional plan for the deployment of enhanced broadband services. This is an issue. I'm not technical. It's not where my skills lie, but I'm trying to get up to speed on that. I've joined a national committee on broadband infrastructure to learn about that and to bring back to our town the things that we may be able to do to help our residents, since we know that our working and learning from home environment is going to persist well into the future. So we need good, reliable broadband to do that. And if there are no other questions, that's the end of my report for today. Anything for me? No? Okay. If not, are there any other issues of interest to discuss this morning?
Not from my end.
Okay. No? Okay. Great. I wish everybody a wonderful, who's taking a school break next week. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe. And it's a beautiful sunny day. Spring is here. Things are positive and hopeful. People are getting vaccines. So certainly a much better place today than we were even a month ago. And thank you to everyone who has been part of making that happen, especially our healthcare workers and the nurses from the schools who've been incredible, the volunteers in the vaccine clinics, our local health department, our post 53. I'm so very proud of the community effort behind getting us past COVID. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that.
I'll
Thank you,
second.
John. Thanks, Duke. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jamie.